I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the International Youth and Students for Social Equality, the IYSSE, the youth and student arm of the Socialist Equality Party of Australia. My name is Max Boddy, and I'm the Assistant National Secretary of the SEP. I'll be chairing the meeting this afternoon. Now, I have been told that there are people online tuning in from Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne, Newcastle, and also from San Diego, as well as New Zealand. This truly is an international meeting, and you're all very welcome. For this meeting, we have a combination of both in-person attendees and, as I said, those joining us via the live stream through Zoom. We hold our meetings in this hybrid character to enable the broadest possible participation while also offering a safer option to prevent the spread of COVID-19. For the in-person event, we are holding it with the highest level of precautions to protect against the virus. This includes multiple HEPA filters, N95 masks, and UV lamps. Despite the claims by capitalist governments that the pandemic is not over, the let-it-rip policies have meant COVID-19 continues to spread and infect millions internationally, now mutating into newer, more deadly and vaccine-resistant variants. Scientists are raising the alarm that these new variants are contributing to a surge of infections. In the United States, hospitalizations doubled in August. The same process is underway in Italy, Japan, Britain, Spain, as well as other countries. Globally, there are 11,100 excess deaths a day attributed to the pandemic. According to the British weekly newspaper The Economist, the cumulative total number of deaths is now standing at a staggering 24.8 million. This is more than the total number of military deaths in the First World War. Yet you would be forgiven if you didn't know this information. This wave of the pandemic has been hidden from the public. The herd immunity strategy adopted by every government forces workers and students to live with the virus as a permanent feature of daily life. In this country, the pandemic is spoken about in the past tense. Virtually all safety and mitigation measures have been dismantled. This included the tearing apart of the essential tracking and monitoring systems for the spread of the virus. The Albanese Labor government has dramatically deepened the policies of the coalition, ending daily reports on deaths, ending isolation periods and mask mandates. On August 25th, even the protection requirements in New South Wales hospitals were removed, with staff no longer needing to wear masks in clinical and patient areas. This was done by New South Wales Labor, with the full-throated support of the unions. They heralded the decision, which now means hospital staff and patients will not even have basic mask protection, as a great victory. The IYSSE joins the SEP and the World Socialist website in fighting for an internationally coordinated strategy to eliminate COVID-19. We are the only club on campus fighting for this program. This forms an essential part of the IYSSE's perspective that Macquarie University management is seeking to silence by refusing to affiliate our club. It is an attack on students' basic democratic rights. And it is not isolated to this campus. At the University of Melbourne, our club was disaffiliated in a similar fashion. At the UOM, that is University of Melbourne Clubs and Societies, is now placing increasingly onerous obstacles in our bid for reaffiliation, including demands to change our socialist aims and making it exceedingly difficult even to just book a room on campus. At the University of Newcastle, where we've been on campus for a decade and a half, management refused to give us a table during the mid-semester orientation week. Only after we pushed back against this attack did they change their mind. Similar processes are occurring with our clubs internationally. To discuss these issues and the broader aspects surrounding the attack on our clubs, we have two speakers today, Elle Chapman and Evrim Yazgan. After their reports, we will open up for questions and discussion before closing with some announcements. As I said, our first speaker today is Elle Chapman. Elle is responsible for the development and work of the IYSSE clubs in Sydney, both for our club here at Macquarie University and our other club at Western Sydney University. She writes for the World Socialist website and has been in the movement for more than a decade after meeting the club while studying art and fine arts at the University of New South Wales. So with that, I'll hand over to Elle.
On behalf of the IYSSE in Sydney, I'd like to thank you for attending this meeting opposing the attack on our club at Macquarie University. This event is the first in-person meeting we've held on campus in some months, but it's a continuation of an unrelenting campaign we've waged for more than 3 months now to insist that our club be affiliated. In our discussions with students, many have expressed shock and surprise that the administration has effectively banned our club from being registered, even though we've met all of the requirements. There is a sense, among students who know about the issue, that management's actions are both unfair and unjust. And that is certainly the case. This is an attack on the democratic rights of the IYSSE, an organisation with a long history at this campus, where we were affiliated for 12 years, and at universities not only across the country, but around the world. However, what we are stressing is that very fundamental and broad issues are at stake. This is not just an attack on the IYSSE, as significant as that would be. It's an attack on the fundamental democratic right of students to politically organise on campus, and even to hold the widest political discussion free from the interference of management. Most importantly, it's a preemptive attack on widespread anti-war sentiment. Amid the deepest crisis of capitalism in generations, the ruling elites are pursuing policies that are threatening a global military catastrophe. Already, war is underway in Ukraine. They know from the lessons of history that this will provoke massive opposition from students and youth. What they are seeking to prevent is for that opposition to be armed with a conscious socialist perspective. This assessment of the attack on our club is borne out by an examination of how it has developed. In opposing any witch hunt, frame-up or censorship, it's critical to expose in some detail the processes taking place to clarify the essential issues. Our club, which had been affiliated since 2010, was deregistered last year, along with almost half of the clubs at Macquarie. That was a bureaucratic cull aimed at restricting student cultural and political life, and frankly, at reducing the amount of money that the administration allocates to student activities. It reflected the transformation of the universities from institutions of learning into profit-driven corporations. In April, the IYSSE held a successful meeting opposing the US-NATO proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. It was part of a global series of meetings by the IYSSE all over the world. Those meetings put forward the only genuine socialist opposition to the war that is underway in Europe. In this meeting, we explained that the conflict has nothing to do with defending Ukraine, human rights, or democracy. It's an imperialist war that was prepared and provoked by the US and its allies. They are using the conflicts to carry out long-standing plans to dismember Russia, steal its resources, and clear the way for war with China. While exposing the responsibility of the US and NATO in the conflict, Our meetings also revealed the reactionary politics of the Putin regime in Russia. We explained that it represents a capitalist oligarchy that emerged through the Stalinist dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Against all segments of the ruling elite, our meetings raised that the only way to end the war is to unite Ukrainian, Russian, and international workers against all of the governments and the capitalist system that is the source of war. That meeting series came under ferocious attack. In a number of countries, far-right Ukrainian nationalists tried to physically prevent the meetings from going ahead. In Canada, our meeting was denounced by a prominent member of the regional government. The Macquarie meeting was also a lightning rod. Ukrainian nationalists and supporters demanded that it be cancelled and called for the administration to drive us from campus. At the time, Macquarie management took an ambivalent position. They allowed the meeting to proceed, but they did not take any clear stand in defence of our democratic rights. They simply forwarded the email attacks of the pro-war zealots through to the IYSSE and suggested we respond. Remember that this meeting and these attacks took place in April, and then on May 3, the IYSSE at Macquarie held a successful annual general meeting and submitted all of the required paperwork. But in an email on May 29, Paul McKay of Student Engagement, Inclusion and Belonging informed us that we weren't going to be affiliated. The reason we were given was that we shared, quote, the same aim and purpose, end quote, as another club at the uni, the Macquarie Socialists, which are affiliated with Socialist Alternative. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Our differences with the Macquarie Socialists and Socialist Alternative are fundamental and irreconcilable. The IYSSE fights to build an international movement of the working class, based on a socialist and revolutionary perspective. The Macquarie Socialists are part of what we call the pseudo-left. They trace their origins to tendencies that split from Trotskyism, the genuine revolutionary movement, decades and decades ago. They reject the bedrock principles of Trotskyism, that is, the revolutionary role of the working class, the fight for its independence from all capitalist parties, and internationalism. The Macquarie Socialists instead represent a privileged layer of the upper middle class. They defend Labour, the Greens, and the trade union bureaucracy, and they peddle identity politics. This divides the working class and advances the interests of grasping layers within the capitalist system itself. These issues are complex, and they may appear somewhat distant from the attack on the IYSSE, but in fact, they find very concrete expression on the issue of war itself. To put it simply, the IYSSE is a socialist and anti-war organisation. The Macquarie Socialists are a pro-war group. They support and have supported the US-led war effort in Ukraine. They fraudulently claim that this is a war for democracy, as the Pentagon pours in hundreds of billions of dollars for weapons for a war with Russia that has already killed hundreds of thousands. They are the cheerleaders for policies that threaten a catastrophic world war. That demonstrates that we don't simply have differences with the Macquarie Socialists. When it comes to the fight against war and the fight for the interests of the working class, they're on the other side of the barricades. But even the Macquarie Socialists felt compelled to issue a statement opposing the attack on the IYSSE. While they put forward all sorts of lies and slanders to undermine our campaign, they acknowledged that we have no overlapping claims with their club. We wrote back to Student Engagement, Inclusion and Belonging, making this known and exposing their false claims. but the only response we got was to say that the application was closed and that we should check the outcome of our formal complaint. However, our formal complaint, which we made on June 11, has met with a similar fate. It's been officially acknowledged, but there's been no outcome or finding. It brings up all sorts of questions about the complaints department at Macquarie. Does it even exist? And is it answerable to students? In our experience, the answer is no. Macquarie University may be stonewalling us, but we haven't simply accepted this. And this isn't just an issue of our club. It is in fact a much bigger question. It is about the right of students to be able to form and join clubs of their choosing. It's about freedom of political expression. Since June 6 this year, we've published 23 articles about the attack on our club on the World Socialist website. Included in this are statements of support from around the world, including Brazil, Turkey, New Zealand, the United States, Germany, Sri Lanka, and Britain. And we've also launched a petition which has nearly 650 signatures. Management, however, has ignored the petition and all the letters that it has received. It is making the name of Macquarie University synonymous with censorship and the political suppression of students. The obvious question is, why is management bothering? The IYSSE is not a mass organisation. We are still a small movement. But the fact that they're willing to damage the reputation of the university to censor us demonstrates that significant political issues are involved. The decision to block the IYSSE's affiliation and then to stonewall us was a political decision, one that would have been discussed at the highest levels of university management. The universities have been transformed. They run as businesses after decades of funding cuts by both Labor and Liberal national governments. They are also completely integrated into the military intelligence apparatus. Macquarie University, like every other major university in this country, receives grants and has deals with the Defence Department totaling in the tens of millions of dollars. The integration of the universities occurs under conditions where Australia is on the front lines for the US war plans with China. Such a war would be the greatest catastrophe in history. It would kill millions of people and threaten the very existence of humanity. This is what capitalism has in store for young people. Horrific wars, a climate disaster, and growing social inequality. That's why, in appealing to you to defend democratic rights and fight for the IYSSE to be affiliated, we are going further. Young people must turn to politics. Our generation must fight for an alternative. The unified struggles of workers internationally for a global society based on peace and social equality. That is the struggle for socialism. It requires study, commitment, and political struggle. But it is the only way forward, so I would urge you to join the IYSSE and fight for this perspective.
Thank you for that, Elle. I think that the points that Elle has raised are really critical in dealing with the fact that this attack on us at Macquarie University is in no way an isolated incident, but is repeated broadly and internationally. For those who've just come in, just to reiterate, we are also live streaming the event, and we have people from what I've been told by the tech team who are tuning in from Sydney, Adelaide, Newcastle, as well as Melbourne, New Zealand, and San Diego. So it is, as I've said before, truly an international event. I'm now pleased to introduce our main speaker for tonight, whose name is Evrim Yazgan. Evrim is the national convener of the IYSSE and a member of the Socialist Equality Party's National Committee. He writes regularly for the World Socialist website and studied at the University of Melbourne, where he was the IYSSE club president for 5 years. He will be speaking to us via the live stream setup. So I welcome Evrim.
Thank you, Max. And welcome everyone, both in person and those who have joined live stream. I think it is very significant that we have such an international turnout for this meeting. I think just to touch on what Elle has raised already, the attacks on the IYSSE at Macquarie University and internationally take place amid a crisis of global capitalism, which threatens another world war. This places youth and students in a fight for their very futures, which are being threatened by the imperialist slide toward nuclear Armageddon. The IYSSE, as the only genuine socialist, revolutionary, and anti-war club on campus, has taken a principled stand against the US-NATO proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. Elle has gone through the fact that we held an important meeting in April on campus as part of an international series, as part of the fight to build a global anti-war movement of youth and students. At that meeting, and in its campaigns and discussions with students, the IYSSE has presented the Marxist revolutionary and internationalist perspective in opposition to all forms of nationalism and pro-war perspectives. We have explained that the reckless escalation of the war in Ukraine by the US and European powers threatens nuclear catastrophe and must be stopped. The IYSSE has taken a principled stand in opposition to the US-NATO proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. This is not a war to defend Ukraine. It is a war of the imperialist powers led by the US to dominate Russia and ultimately the Eurasian landmass. This reckless militarism threatens a nuclear conflagration that could wipe out life on Earth. We oppose the invasion of Ukraine by Russia from the socialist left, not the imperialist right. The claims in the media that this war was unprovoked and that the Biden administration is sending tens of billions worth of weapons to Ukraine to defend democracy and help the Ukrainian people are lies. In the 18 months since the war in Ukraine began, the US and European imperialist powers have deepened and escalated the conflict at every turn. Since the start of the year, the US media has promoted Ukraine's spring offensive as a decisive turning point in the war. Led by forces trained by NATO and armed with NATO weapons, the offensive has amounted to Ukrainians being used as cannon fodder. The growing recognition in the US media of the failure of the counteroffensive does not lessen the danger posed by the war. Rather, there is an immense danger of the US responding to the increasingly desperate state of its proxy war with Russia with a major new military escalation. Washington's mantra in Ukraine is that the war must be fought in the interests of US imperialism to the last Ukrainian. Already, estimates are that more than 200,000 Ukrainians have been killed and nearly 100,000 Russian troops have died during the war. The horror of the war has left thousands more severely wounded, including tens of thousands of amputees and numbers of refugees unseen since World Wars I and II. The war's origins lie in the 1991 dissolution of the Soviet Union by the Stalinist bureaucracy, which restored capitalism, gave rise to the oligarchic regimes in Ukraine and Russia, and opened up a 30-year period of unending wars launched by US imperialism. Since 1991, NATO has aggressively expanded eastward toward Russia. In 2014, the US backed a far-right coup in Kiev that overthrew a pro-Russian government and brought to power a pro-NATO government, which spent the next 7 years preparing for war against Russia. On this question, the differences between the IYSSE and the pro-war Macquarie socialists affiliated with Socialist Alternative that Elle alluded to are crystal clear. In July last year, Socialist Alternative publication Red Flag enthusiastically supported NATO weaponry being sent to Ukraine as part of its supposed self-defense. It stated that Russia's, quote, invasion cannot be defeated by pacifist methods. Western military supplies went some way to preventing a rapid Russian military victory and the imposition of a puppet government in the early stages of the war, end quote. The aim of the imperialist powers in this war is not the defense of democracy, but the carve-up of the entire region whose vast resources they need to prepare for an even larger conflict with China. This is why generations of Ukrainians are now being sent into the type of mass slaughter unseen in Europe since the end of World War II. From the standpoint of imperialism, their lives are disposable. Last month, Biden met with the leaders of Japan and South Korea at a summit held at Camp David near Washington, D.C. Under the guise of maintaining peace and stability in Asia and deterring China, the meeting's central aim was the preparation for war against Beijing. Plans discussed include annual joint war games, expanded military intelligence sharing, the consolidation of supply chains, and a three-way leaders hotline to respond to crises in Northeast Asia. The military cooperation of Japan and South Korea, both of which host major American bases and tens of thousands of military personnel, is essential to US plans for war with its nuclear-armed rival. Playing the role of southern anchor in US-led war aims against China is Australia. Behind the backs of the population, successive Australian governments have placed the country on the front lines of a potentially catastrophic war. This was set in motion in 2011 when the then Obama administration announced its foreign strategy, the pivot to Asia. Welcomed by then Greens-backed Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard, Obama and his Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced the pivot on the floor of Australian Parliament. The pivot would include a massive stepping up of US military and naval presence in the Asia-Pacific, as well as establishing closer military and economic ties with countries across the region to surround China. Since coming to office in May 2022, the Labor government of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has deepened Australia's integration into US plans for war with China, which a majority of the Australian ruling elite see as vital for the advancement of Australia's own imperialist ambitions in the Indo-Pacific region. This included the announcement in March of Australia's commitment to spending $368 billion on nuclear-powered submarines as part of the AUKUS military pact with the US and UK. The agreement was first touted by the US, Britain, and Australia in 2020 under Prime Minister Scott Morrison. It has, though, been followed through and fleshed out under Albanese as Australia is being cemented behind the population's back as Washington's main attack dog in the Indo-Pacific in preparations for war between nuclear-armed powers. AUKUS has been dressed up as deterrence from aggression, but it is a pivotal part of the escalating military encirclement of China by the US and its closest partners. Under the AUKUS deal, US nuclear submarines will be already based in Western Australia by the end of this year. In addition, last month's Australian Labor Party National Conference unequivocally committed the party and its trade union apparatus to a program of war against China, and an accompanying class war against the jobs, wages, and conditions of workers. Any pretense of an anti-AUKUS push, let alone of opposition to a potentially cataclysmic US-led nuclear war on China, disintegrated. After a highly orchestrated debate, much inflated by the corporate media, AUKUS was cemented into Labor's platform. This supposed anti-AUKUS faction of the Labor Party has been promoted by various pseudo-left and protest groups, including the so-called Anti-AUKUS Coalition. This coalition of protest groups, pseudo-left organizations, Greens members, and others has nothing to do with the fight to build a genuine anti-war movement. Its purpose is to block the development of a movement of workers and youth against the source of war, capitalism. The coalition aims to redirect anti-war opposition back behind a section of the political establishment calling for a more independent Australian foreign policy. The sharpest expression of this fact is that the anti-AUKUS coalition says nothing about the war that is already underway, the US-NATO conflict in Ukraine, which some of its prominent constituents, including the pseudo-left Socialist Alliance, have actively supported. Nor does the coalition oppose war with China. It speaks for a minority within the Australian capitalist ruling class, which has warned that Australian participation in an all-out war would be economically devastating and would threaten social and political upheavals. This position is echoed by Socialist Alternative. Its electoral front, the Victorian Socialists, held a meeting in June under the banner Stop the Drive to War. The event was a political fraud aimed at obscuring the key issues in the fight against war and diverting workers and young people behind reactionary Australian nationalism. The starkest aspect of the meeting was that at an event ostensibly opposing war, not a single word was said about the war that is underway in Ukraine. The Socialist Alternative speakers did not even pretend to oppose the threatened war against China. They simply called for Australia not to participate in it. But the threat of nuclear war doesn't emerge out of the policy decisions of individual capitalist leaders. War emerges out of the intractable contradictions of the capitalist system, above all between an integrated world economy and the division of the globe into rival nation states. In periods of capitalist crisis, the ruling class seeks a way out of its impasse through the path of war. The center of the global capitalist crisis is US imperialism. Having emerged out of World War II as the global superpower, Washington has seen a protracted and accelerating economic decline over recent decades. The American ruling elite has sought to halt this decline through 3 decades of unending war. Illegal US invasions in Iraq, Afghanistan, throughout the Middle East and North Africa, as well as interventions in the Balkans and elsewhere, have seen millions of civilians killed and the greatest refugee crisis since the Second World War. Now, these wars are metastasizing into a far deadlier conflict against Russia and China, who Washington sees as the main threats to its attempts to shore up its position as the global hegemonic ruler. In 1928, Russian Marxist Leon Trotsky, co-leader of the 1917 Russian Revolution with Vladimir Lenin, wrote, quote, "In the period of crisis, the hegemony of the United States will operate more completely, more openly, and more ruthlessly than in the period of boom." End quote. Trotsky also explained in 1934, quote, "US capitalism is up against the same problems that pushed Germany in 1914 on the path of war. The world is divided, it must be redivided. For Germany, it was a question of organizing Europe. The United States must organize the world. History is bringing mankind face to face with the volcanic eruption of American imperialism." End quote. This prescient analysis is now coming to fruition, and war abroad is being accompanied by war against the working class at home. While hundreds of billions are spent on machines of death, the Australian Labor government, like its counterparts in the capitalist governments around the world, are overseeing a massive assault on the wages and living and working conditions of the working class. The ruling elite have already overseen mass death and illness amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which is estimated to have killed around 28 million people around the world due to the criminally negligent policies of herd immunity pursued by capitalist governments internationally. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine have also exacerbated and accelerated the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, with skyrocketing inflation seeing millions of workers and youth struggling to pay for food, energy, and housing. These same conditions, which are driving the capitalist class toward war and the further degradation of living and working conditions of ordinary people, are also seeing a resurgence of working class struggle in every country. An explosive mood of anger and militancy is emerging among the working class internationally. More than 10,000 US film and television writers have now been on strike for well over 3 months, becoming the second longest strike in this section of US industry. Workers are engaged in a battle against the giant corporations that dominate the film, internet, streaming, and television industries. The rioters were joined almost 2 months ago by 65,000 actors, beginning the first dual strike by the two sections of workers since 1960. The contracts of 150,000 auto workers at General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis will expire on September 14. Workers are increasingly determined to fight not only against new attacks, but to reverse concessions previously imposed with the support of the union bureaucracy. The soaring cost of living, one of the consequences of escalating war and the bailout of the rich, has sparked social unrest throughout the world this year, from the protests of millions in France to the strikes of hundreds of thousands in the UK, the strike of dock workers in Canada, and mass protests in Sri Lanka against austerity. In Australia, workers are calling for industrial action at their highest rate in 5 years. In all of these struggles, workers are coming up against the capitalist system and the corporatized trade union apparatuses that defend it. Here at Macquarie University, workers have formed a rank and file committee, independent from the pro-corporate National Tertiary Education Union, to take forward the struggle of university workers against the union management sellout enterprise agreement, which provides no protections from rampant casualization and exploitation of fixed-term contracts, excessive workloads, and significant job losses. It is to this developing movement of the working class that young people and students must turn to end war. The emerging movement of the world working class and radicalization of youth has not yet developed into a conscious anti-war movement, but the basis for that is there. The critical issue is that of political clarification and perspective, which is precisely what Macquarie University management is trying to stifle by blocking the IYSSE. In 1917, the Russian working class, led by the Bolshevik Party, overthrew the Tsarist regime and established the world's first and only workers' state. That event was based on the principles of internationalism and socialism, and was the greatest anti-war movement of all time, precipitating the end of World War I. It proves that a movement of the working class based on socialist internationalism can end war. The lesson of the Russian Revolution is that what is required is the building of in advance of the struggles of the working class, of a revolutionary Marxist leadership grounded on the lessons of history. The building of such a leadership among youth and students is the task of the IYSSE, and it is precisely because of its anti-war socialist stance that the IYSSE is being censored at Macquarie and internationally. I call on all students at Macquarie and around the country to join the IYSSE's fight against management's attempts at Macquarie University to cut students off from socialist and anti-war politics. Oppose the political censorship of the IYSSE as part of the struggle to defend the democratic rights of all students at Macquarie and more broadly. And most importantly, join the IYSSE's fight to build the international anti-war movement. Take up the fight for revolutionary socialism today. Thank you.
Thank you, Evram. I think that report really does place the attacks on our clubs here and internationally within its broader historical and political context. And I'm sure it has generated a series of questions or points of clarification And now we will take any questions at all, either in the chat online, you can post a question, it'll be passed on, or here in the meeting itself. But just while you're thinking of questions, I will just make the point, and it was remiss of me to miss this, but certainly there are, as I said, people tuning in from all over the world, including the Appalachia coalfields, which I didn't mention before, but certainly someone joining from there, so very much welcome, as with everybody else. So if there are any questions or comments, please let me know, and it will be passed on by the tech team through the power of the internet. There are two comments that have come through that I might just read, and our panelists, either Elle or Evram, can remark on those comments or make some points off it. The first is from student Ashley, who is saying, there was a video on the submarines last week, I believe. The way the media is talking about it is scary. I felt like I was watching the start of a horror movie. There was another comment from student Yoop, who put a link to the defense.org website with the release of nuclear-powered submarines and the propulsion challenge, and he says, the Defence Force is even getting high school students to design subs. Indeed, as I think Ashley said, something out of a horror movie. Did either Elle or Evram want to make any points flowing from these comments?
Thanks for the comments. I mean, I think that both of them reflect different aspects of just how far advanced the crisis is. And this is something which is often not really discussed in the mainstream media. I mean, one can be forgiven for thinking that the war in Ukraine, the consistent escalation and deepening of it by the imperialist powers, as well as the preparations for war in this region, are just insane. And I think that there's an element of truth in that, but clearly, as I tried to go through in my report, there are far more fundamental political and above all economic factors which go into why the drive to war is emerges under capitalism. Now, in terms of what's been put forward, it can appear like something which is quite scary, and certainly the role that universities and schools are now being made to play by the governments, by university managements, is something which we need to be paying quite close attention to. I mean, every single university in Australia now has signed on to multi-million-dollar deals, including Macquarie University, with defence contractors, arms manufacturers, and the like. It does point to why it is that the IYSSE is being barred from campuses around the country and internationally. I mean, this isn't something which is new in that sense. I mean, virtually the same charge that was laid against, or that has been laid against the IYSSE at Macquarie, was attempted to be used by the student union at the University of Melbourne to prevent us from forming a club there between 2014 and 2016. We applied to affiliate a club in 2014, fulfilled all of the requirements, but were rejected on the basis that we had overlapping aims with Socialist Alternative. Now, we, of course, opposed this. We wrote an open letter against it. The student union continued its anti-democratic block on the IYSSE, putting forward all sorts of spurious reasons, including saying that the IYSSE could not be affiliated because of the fact that we'd written an open letter and therefore could not have a working relationship with the student union. We ended up being affiliated after a 2.5-year campaign there, because we were able to appeal to broad sections of students, and the student union was unable in that sense to continue on this path. Now, that in itself expresses what I think has to be built at Macquarie University. We have to understand the significance of having the IYSSE's club on campus to students, and develop quite a sort of active campaign against this. But I think in light of that, given the fact that the University of Melbourne IYSSE has again been disaffiliated last year due to or in another anti-democratic fashion, it does highlight again the need to develop the work at that university, and we are holding our IGM to reaffiliate on October 5th at 1:30 p.m. And I would encourage students to attend that and help us build it. But I think just in closing, I mean, it goes to a point that Elle raised in her opening remarks. Yes, there is an element of the drive towards war and the discussions that are taking place of being, rather unsettling, concerning, even scary. But I think we have to understand that the ruling class is even more terrified of the strength of the working class. That is why, the IYSSE, a relatively small student organization, is being attacked in this way. I mean, that is a real understanding by the ruling class and university managements of the strength and power of the IYSSE, because our perspective lines up with the objective interests and concerns of young people. So I think that there's a sort of it's not all doom and gloom. As I said, the basis for building an anti-war movement is there, and I think that that's something that everyone on this call and there in person should take very seriously and take up a struggle for.
Thanks, Evram. Elle would like to make a few additional points.
Yeah, I think Evram, I agree with the points that Evram made, and I would just echo that, yes, it is scary, it is horrific what is being prepared by the ruling class. And we can already see what's happening in Ukraine. You have the slaughter of, many, many young people there. It's an absolute nightmare, as we characterized it on one of the articles on our website. However, there is also the working class that is coming forward and does want to fight. And the issue is, on what perspective will it fight on? And that's what we are, attempting to resolve, is the issue of this leadership of the working class and on what perspective it fights. So anyway, I'll just add that.
Thanks, Elle. So I will call for other questions or comments. Online, there has been another comment from David from the US in regards to the comment by Yoop, saying that this is similar to military training programs it was similar to military training programs in high schools in the US, which in some cases are being made mandatory, which, as David points out, which is illegal. And then he's also got a link there to thousands of high school students being forced into this mandatory military training programs. There is I'll take one question online. There's another question from you asking what have student responses at Macquarie University been like in regards to our disaffiliation. But I will just call, and we can take more than just one question. Are there any other questions? Any questions at all on anything? Just raise your hand. If you're in the room, I'll have to repeat the question out so they can hear online. But any others online at this stage? Yep, the fellow up the back.
The IYSSE organization, they are cutting students from what they are.
Okay, so your question is, and let me know if I've got this right, what is the perspective of the IYSSE when it comes to war? And also, I think you were making a comment that, generally people are opposed to war, and that's why it's clear that's why there's that process of us not being affiliated. But want more clarification on our perspective. Thank you. And there's one more question online. It said, I would be interested to hear about the early contact the presenters had with the IYSSE, what was being discussed at their first meeting, and why they went on to join and lead the IYSSE. Thank you. All right. Which one of our speakers would like to begin to answer those questions? If you'd like to, yeah. I'll hand over to Elle.
So to answer Youp's question, what's it been like? What responses have we had from Macquarie students? I think it's quite a complex issue that we're discussing with students. So the sort of first response, students are a little bit surprised or shocked to hear that Macquarie University is censoring our club. They don't quite understand why that would happen at a university which is supposed to be about education and different perspectives. And then when we explain the kind of broader context of why this is taking place, which we've gone over in our reports today, that this is happening under the cloud of growing war, danger, and attacks on the working class, I think it then becomes more understood by students. They kind of can then see why this would be taking place, and also the role of Macquarie University in militarization. I mean, the campus is involved in militarization. There are grants and all kinds of research that takes place on the campus in order to further the development of the military. There's talk of training students up so that they can work on AUKUS, submarines, and various other aspects of the military. So Macquarie University is not a kind of arbitrary, they're not just on the sidelines. They have a direct role and a direct view on war. And that's why, in the main, they're so opposed to having us here, but also the corporatization of the university and the fact that it's more and more becoming a hub of profit, making money from education. And so when we explain those things to students, I think for quite a few of them that I spoke to, it sort of makes a lot of sense to them because they see their own experiences within that broader context. And the fact that there is very little support for students. Many of the students we spoke to are working lots of hours every week and juggling their study, other responsibilities. I mean, it's just really, I don't know how students get through and manage to pass their courses, but testament to them. But yeah, it is a very difficult situation students are being put in, and young people. And this is a reflection of what capitalism has to offer for young people. So yeah, anyway, I'll just make those points.
Thanks, Elle. I'll hand over to Evram, who'll make some additional points.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the first question was about the response of Macquarie students. Now I can't exactly speak to that. I've received reports and heard from the experiences of Elle and Max and others about that, but I haven't been on the campus there, though. I think the response of Macquarie students is reflective of the response of students and youth that we speak to across the country and frankly internationally. I mean, the fact that we've received dozens and dozens of statements that have been published on the World Socialist website exposing the anti-democratic and censorial character of the blocking of the IYSSE from students and young people around the world shows that there is a real sensitivity to this. And when we raise it with students here in Melbourne, at La Trobe, at Victoria University, at the University of Melbourne, etc., there is broad concern. I think the difficulty, or the not the difficulty, but the important task for us in the IYSSE is explaining that this attack on our club, firstly, is a much broader or I guess more significant attack on what our club represents. That is an anti-war and socialist perspective. And the other issue that we have to drive home when we speak to students is that for that reason, it represents a broader attack on the democratic rights, the freedom of speech of students and youth more broadly. I mean, you can imagine what will be the result if this is allowed to proceed and goes sort of unchecked, is that Macquarie University management will be able to essentially pick and choose which clubs are affiliated on campus, make up, essentially lie about the reasons they've given for disaffiliating, blocking various clubs, and then will be completely unanswerable to the student body in relation to that. I mean, it would set a real precedent for further attacks against the student population under conditions where there is a broad radicalization, particularly among younger people who have grown up. I'm 28 years old. My entire life has been under the shadow of US wars abroad. I mean, for an 18-year-old, they would have been born in 2005. That's 2 years after the US launched its illegal invasion of Iraq. I mean, their entire lives have been under perpetual US war. There is a radicalization taking place. And I think that this goes to the other question which was raised, which was the relationship between and the issue of, firstly, what is the IYSSE's perspective, and in relation to that, why it is that we're being censored. I mean, the IYSSE's perspective essentially is that the drive to war emerges objectively out of the economic system of capitalism. This is primarily due to the intractable contradictions under capitalism between the nation-state system and the world economy. The fact that you have the world economy means that resources, capital is able to flow around the world, but that economy is divided up into competing rival nation states, which at some point will come to blows over resources, spheres of influence, markets, and the like. And that's what leads to war. It is an objective development in that sense. So the IYSSE's perspective is that if capitalism is the source of imperialist war, then getting rid of capitalism is the only way to end war. Now, the other basic contradiction of capitalism is that between the private ownership of the means of production and the socialized nature of production, where you have a billion-strong working class around the world producing all of the wealth in society, yet society's wealth is hoarded by the capitalist ruling elite. And that's why we say that the two issues of imperialist war and class struggle are, in that sense, two sides of the same capitalist crisis. So our perspective then is that what is required is to develop a socialist revolutionary leadership that is going to lead the coming working class struggles, which are coming and have already begun in response to the capitalist crisis, to actually overthrow capitalism and put in its place a socialist planned economy, which is based on social need, not private profit. We also think that this must, in its essence, be internationalist, because, as I raised before, I mean, nationalism is the essential tool that is used by the ruling elite to justify war, and the result of it is war. Only through a unified movement of the working class can the nationalist drive to war be overcome. So I think, these are the sort of basics, the ABCs of what the IYSSE's perspective is. And it's because of this perspective, and because we're the only ones putting forward this perspective, that we're being censored. I mean, it's worth, I guess, pointing out that it's not Socialist Alternative, it's not Socialist Alliance, or these other pseudo-left organizations who support US imperialist interventions who are being censored on the campuses. It's the IYSSE, because in that sense we're the only ones who put forward a genuine anti-war and socialist perspective. So I think that is the essential issue that has to be understood here, and it's something which is developing not just here but internationally as well.
Look, just to further emphasise and to respond to the question of the gentleman here in regards to the role and the question of Macquarie University, and in that sense why they're censoring us, and I think it's been touched on by Elle and Evram, the question of the whole transformation and privatisation of universities. I'll call now on Chris Gordon, who is an academic here at Macquarie University. He is also a founding member of the Macquarie University Rank and File Committee, who's taken up a principled fight against the NTEU, which is the union that covers tertiary education workers, and their recently concluded sellout agreement. So Chris will make a few points now.
Thank you. My name is Chris Gordon. I'm an academic at Macquarie University, and as has just been said, I'm a founding member of the Macquarie Rank and File Committee of Workers and Staff. It's an organisation that we need to build that's fighting for first-class education, unifying with other university workers, and in fact other workers, other health workers, rail workers, and teachers, and indeed not just in Australia but internationally. It's an international fight, and that point's been made already. Part of the privatisation of universities, which has been referred to by Max just now, I think is really quite crucial. Universities, you don't think of them as educational organisations, but as part of the business-oriented organisations that are focused on profit. And one aspect of that is the promotion of STEM, and in connection with this, AUKUS developments. Billions of dollars have been pumped into STEM activities, scientific research, not in the interest of blue sky research or advancing humanity, but research that's going to further the interests of the military-industrial complex, and that's what the STEM is about, and it's the unions. For example, the NTEU, the National Tertiary Education Union, throughout Australia, actually promotes that, and they also sort of fight for what they call universities being internationally competitive, which again fits in with the profit-driven agenda. One of the connections between the rank and file committee that we have formed and the IYSSE is the silencing. They can't stand a anti-war socialist voice anywhere. So in the same way that the IYSSE has been silenced, so is the Macquarie Rank and File Committee, and the NTU will do everything it can to actually silence us. And Just on the NTU, the development, it's been referred to already, the conditions of staff at university is dictated by an enterprise agreement. A new enterprise agreement has just been rammed through at Macquarie, which the NTU and management have portrayed as a good deal for staff, and it's nothing of the kind. It'll do nothing to protect casualisation. It'll promote casualisation. It promotes job insecurity, and it's a pay cut. And so we need to oppose this deal, these developments at Macquarie. Just one last comment. It's been raised about what if students think about what's happening on campus. One, there's been many elders referred to the many articles that have been written on the IYSSE developments. One thing I think that's one comment from a student that I think has been very important was the comment that there's clearly a hidden agenda. So the universities are blocking us because there was a hidden agenda that they're promoting. Anyway, thank you very much. I'll end my comments there.
There's another question online that I'd like to address in addition to some of the other points that have been raised. It's a question that's very short, and it's asking, what about the referendum vote in Australia? Now, I'm sure many online and here know what that's in reference to, but it's in reference to what's called the voice, which is a proposal to change the constitution in Australia, to install a anti-democratic body called the Voice that, in that sense, can't be removed without another referendum as a result of it being in the constitution. And it may seem, in that sense, initially disconnected from this discussion, but it is in fact intimately connected. Now, our party has a very principled and clear position when it comes to the Voice. We oppose it. We oppose it because it in no way is going to ameliorate the conditions of Aboriginal people, as is put forward. But really, the fact that it is being promoted under conditions of what is, as has gone through by the speakers and in the answers to the questions, an unrelenting drive to war. It is being used to revamp Australian nationalism, to cover over the fact that there is a division within society that is not race but class. There is a ruling class and there is a working class. The working class produces all the wealth in society and the ruling class profits off that. That ruling class is seeking and is joining in US imperialism's drive to war because it suits its interests. But it doesn't suit the interests of the working class and doesn't suit the interests of ordinary people. This voice, or the so-called voice, has nothing progressive behind it. I think one aspect that is important to emphasise in relation to this is that whilst there is this referendum posed on the Voice, what we have just been through in quite a bit of detail through the reports, the AUKUS deal, the war drive against China through the pivot to Asia announced on the floor of the Australian Parliament. None of these the Australian working class got a vote on. None of these have been put forward to a referendum. This has all been done and established behind the backs of the working class. So under these conditions, there is an attempt to create some national unity, which is seen as an essential platform of the Albanese Labor government as part of its drive to war. But we also don't support, in that sense, the No campaign, either the official No campaign, which put forward a position that this is creating racial divide in some form or another, certainly dog whistling to the far right and racist forces, or the so-called progressive No vote, that of the layers of Lydia Thorpe and the like, who are putting forward a position that is essentially that the Voice doesn't go far enough, that the Voice, which is, as I said, will enshrine a privileged layer of the Aboriginal elite in a, as I said, anti-democratic voice, that these layers will not only be strengthened, but their control will be deepened. I mean, Lydia Thorpe and her layers are saying this doesn't go far enough. They're calling for, a treaty and sovereignty. Again, completely cover-overing the fundamental issues of class within society and putting it forward along racialist lines. Our party calls for an active boycott. That is, not just passive abstentionism, but to actively fight to draw out the essential class content within society that to resolve the fundamental issues that face the Aboriginal working class is not going to be through the enrichment of an Aboriginal elite who sit far away from the kind of conditions, in many cases quite squalid, of the Aboriginal working class, but in fact through the unity on a class line of both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal working class. And so this campaign, which we are going to, and I think it is on screen, we have launched today, our statement, is calling for this active boycott. And I think that, as I said, I think this is a critical question and is certainly in no way disconnected from the drive to war, and which is, as I said, a chief platform of the Labor Party. I think more can be said. I think everyone wanted to make some points on this, but I do think that this question is quite essential. So I'll turn over to Evram.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And, I think it is important that this has come up, as Max raised just in closing there. I think that the issue of the voice is intimately tied up with the questions that we've been discussing thus far in this meeting. They are intimately linked, and you can see that in what's behind the voice. I mean, our statement, which has gone up today, which I encourage everyone to read, it's been put in the chat for the live stream and should be discussed with everyone who's attending in person as well. Goes through some of the basic reasons why the Labor Party is putting forward this referendum. I mean, a referendum which we, I think, quite accurately describe in the statement as a political sham, and is in particular backing a yes vote. And one of those essential reasons is, firstly, that the Labor Party is using the voice referendum to put a sort of progressive gloss on its agenda, which is down to the core, through and through, political reaction. It is pro-business and militarist. That is, if you wanted to sort of define this Labor government, that is its agenda. So it is seeking to sort of use widespread opposition to the centuries of oppression of the Aboriginal working class by Australian and British capitalism, to try and put a progressive gloss on its pro-business and militarist agenda. And I think that this is also highlighted in the role that the Labor government is playing in essentially turning Australia into a US aircraft carrier. And I think that the fact that there are, major developments, upgrades, and openings up of vast swathes of the Australian north and northwest to American military use is bound up with the voice. I mean, you see this from Cape York to Darwin, the Pilbara, the Cocos Islands, and many future and current stationing of US Marines and soldiers will be on Indigenous lands, such as the Tiwi Islands, where you already have large-scale war games being held. So I think that there is a sort of logic to the development of the voice amid a deepening of Australian imperialist involvement in US-led war aims against China. I think just a final point on this, I would just echo the points that Max raised, that our opposition to the voice, firstly, does not lend any kind of credence or political support to the official no camps, which use racialist politics for their own means. But we understand that the voice is not only not a step forward for ordinary Aboriginal and Indigenous workers, but in effect cements a layer of Aboriginal elite into the capitalist system, a layer who profit, who develop their own personal wealth at the expense of the Indigenous and non-Indigenous working class. I mean, that is what the aim of the voice is to cement that layer into Australian capitalism through the Constitution, which itself is a thoroughly reactionary document, which doesn't even possess a Bill of Rights. So I think the statement that the Socialist Equality Party has produced is a very strong one, which I encourage everyone to study.
And just to make a few further points, our call for an active boycott is in no way a call for people to illegally not vote. I mean, it is compulsory to vote in this country, and it's a crime to advocate for a boycott of the vote itself. But we call on workers and youth to register their opposition by casting informal ballots. But above all, join our active boycott campaign in the lead up to October 14th, when the referendum is being held. And that this is part of a campaign to mobilise workers and young people against war and the existential threat which confronts the working class in this country and internationally. Because I'll tell you, there may be a yes and no camp, but they agree on one thing. They agree on war. That's not being voted on. That's not being discussed. Both Labor, Liberal, Lydia Thorpe, the pseudo-left, as we have gone through, in one form or another, line up with imperialism and their barbarous drive to war, which threatens mankind, not just in the question of barbarism like the Second World War, but nuclear annihilation. But just as the same process that gives rise to war gives rise to its opposite, and that's been, I think, well emphasised by our speakers tonight, that is that it is compelling the working class and young people into action. There will be and is developing a genuine anti-war movement, but it needs to be directed. It cannot just be left on its own. And that's why we fight to build a vanguard revolutionary party, armed with the lessons of history in order to guide the working class and young people against this existential threat. And that is an essential component of the active boycott campaign and an essential component of the campaign we've waged at the Macquarie University, as well as universities across the country and internationally. So I do reiterate what others have said. If you are not yet a member, join the IYSSE. Make that decision to take up a fight for this campaign. And also join our active boycott campaign and take up a fight against the reactionary voice to Parliament, as well as part of our broader campaign against war here and internationally. Now, just check if there are any questions or statements that have been made that we haven't been able to get to. We will get in contact with you afterwards through messages and other things. I mean, I know that there was one question we didn't quite touch on about our own history and how we got involved with the IYSSE. Just to make one point on what got me involved, in my first meeting, now I was doing Aboriginal studies at the University of Newcastle, and I in fact asked a question about the conditions that face Aboriginal Australians. I asked, in that sense, what is the position of the IYSSE on this question and how to, end the attacks and the horrid conditions on Aboriginal people? And it was answered very clearly on class lines, that this is a class question, not a race question, and that bound up with the interests of the Aboriginal working class is that of the interests of the non-Aboriginal working class. So in many ways, the question we've been discussing tonight is intimately linked to my own political development. I'm sure it's different for everyone else who has joined, but that's why, essentially an answer to that question was why I joined the movement in the first place back in 2010. And it was the most important decision of my life. So I think with those comments, and I really thank you for your questions and attendance tonight. Before we conclude, we have obviously pointed everybody to our statement published online for the active boycott campaign, which I very much encourage everybody to read. But we would like to now pass a resolution, which hopefully can be put on. Oh, yes, sorry. You can see it both online and here. And this resolution is for we want to pass here at the meeting. We will organise online for a poll or hands up to be organised so we can take a vote. But the resolution is the following. This meeting of the International Youth and Students for Social Equality demands that the political censorship of our club at Macquarie be ended and that university management affiliate the IYSSE immediately. We resolve to continue an aggressive campaign on and off campus, mobilising students, youth and workers in opposition to the de facto ban on the IYSSE until these demands are met. We'll open for any discussion on this resolution first before I put it to the vote. Again, the tech team, let me know if there's any specific points. And also let me know if we're okay to go on a vote. So the first vote, all those in favour. If you're in the room, raise your hand, and online, fill out the poll. Well, it's unanimous in the room. Okay, so I have 20 yeses of 25 online. All right. Well, I'll certainly that the resolution is passed, but I will call, if you can lower everyone's hands, I'll call for any no votes. Are the hands lowered? Okay, are there any no votes? Okay, there's one no vote. If you can lower the hands, and just any active abstentions. We'll just take that quickly. All right, well, with how many in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. The 11 in the room and 20 online, more than 20 online, I'll call that resolution passed. Thank you very much. Finally, I'd like to point those attendees to some of the literature that we have for sale. There is for those in person, there is a table out there with literature. You can see on the screen there are two very important books which relate to the discussion we've been having, particularly on war. One is our 2016 statement by the IYSSE, calling for the development of an international anti-war movement, and the other, which is $5, which can also be purchased from Mering Books online, which will be posted in the chat. We also have the critical book by Comrade David North, which is A Quarter Century of War. The IYSSE, through its analysis, has really unmatched in its detailed going over of US imperialism's drive to war following the liquidation of the Soviet Union. All the various processes that have given rise to the war drive we've been discussing today were analysed and worked through and are contained within the lectures and documents of this book. So I very much encourage all those here who have not got a copy to purchase one. It's $30, as you can see on screen. The other two books I'd like to promote, I hope you can, if that can be seen online. This one's called Leon Trotsky and the Struggle for Socialism in the 21st Century. Oh, there's a slide for it. This contains, again, essential lectures developed by David North on Leon Trotsky, who is truly a historic figure, not just because he is, in that sense, a figure of history, but his analysis, which I think was gone through quite well by Evram in his report, not only stand the test of time, but are entirely relevant to today because the same objective economic processes and contradictions are yet to be resolved. As Dave writes in the book, Trotsky's place in history grows ever larger because the basic tendencies and characteristics of contemporary capitalism and imperialism correspond to his analysis of the dynamic of global capitalist crises and the logic of global class struggle. His writings, indispensable for an understanding of the contemporary world, remain as fresh as the day they were written. And finally, in relation to this, we have COVID, Capitalism and the Class War, a social and political chronology of the pandemic. This contains a series of articles, statements produced by the World Socialist website. In that sense, the Socialist Equality Party, which is Trotskyism in the 21st century, was able to utilise, in that sense, the analysis, perspicacity and methods that had been employed and developed by Trotsky in order to analyse the COVID pandemic in a way that no other organisation could. It recognised very early on the dangers that it posed, and it developed a strategy, an international strategy for its elimination, which, had it been adopted, we wouldn't be still sitting here with masks on and HEPA filters on. But not only is this book contain an outline of that strategy and the importance of its development, but also the role of the various capitalist governments worldwide as they began the process of letting the virus rip, leading to a situation today, as I went through in my opening remarks, of nearly 25 million unnecessary deaths. So I very much encourage you to make a purchase of that today. It's $40. Finally, as mentioned before, I'd like to just say for everybody attending, if there's anyone online who is in an area where we are yet to have an IYSSE club, we would like you to get in contact with us. We want to build it, but I encourage everyone here today, if you have not already, make the decision and join not only the IYSSE, but the Socialist Equality Party, and take part in the fight for the revolutionary development of the working class and the future of world socialist revolution. So I thank you very much again for your attendance, your contributions, and we will be in touch. Thank you very much.